Hi everyone. We have with us today Dr. Romesh Dias Bandaranaike, who was the former director of the Plantation Management Monitoring Division of the State Ministry of Company Estate Reforms in the 1990s, who steered the process of the privatization of the management of government-owned plantations. Dr. Dias Bandaranaike, thank you so much for being with us here today. To start off with, I was wondering if you could share with us what kind of thought process went into the privatization of the management of these estates, especially the formation of the regional plantation companies, and specifically if you could share us some insight into how you decided on the specific lease period for these estates.
Fine. Thank you, Sudaraka. Let me try to put it very simply. At that time in the 1990s, the JDB and the SPC, the two plantation corporations, were the biggest pots of political patronage available in the country. Politicians, MPs, ministers, all were using those as their places to get people, their constituents, employment, contracts, transport contracts, so many other things, right? So actually, even trying to start a process of privatizing the plantation or privatizing the management would have been a non-starter. So we could not even refer to the question of doing, looking at privatization. So what happened was, I was involved. I was at a place called the Sri Lanka Business Development Center. And there was someone in the Ministry of Finance, Mr. Faiz Mohiddin, who was at a relatively low level, but he is a brilliant tactician. So he's the one who came up with the main idea. And the original consultancy, SLBDC, was given a consultancy to do a study on how to improve the operation of the JEDB and the SPC. That was all. There was not a word about privatization, management, nothing. That is how we started the process. So Faiz had his different techniques and how to do this. To bring about policy change, you need, say, three different things. One is somebody's got to develop the policy. It needs to be a good policy. Secondly, you've got to build a consensus among all the people who have a serious say in this policy and who may, if they are not part of the original process, just stymie the process when you get to actual implementation. The third is, in a thing like the plantation, which is very politically sensitive, you needed to have the political will at the highest level to sometimes take political decisions which are not popular. Luckily for us, President Premadasa was the president at the time, and he had as his right-hand man, Mr. Paskalingam, who was the Secretary of Treasury, but not just the Secretary of Treasury, the most powerful person in Sri Lanka, other than for Premadasa. And so we had that. But still, what do you do? So how do you move this? So Faiz created, he got money, he could get money from anybody, international organizations, grant money to do studies, because he had a track record of seriously bring about policy change. So he got money, funny enough, it was from the Asia Foundation, and got ₹1 million, which was a lot of money at that time, to get a consulting study done on how to improve the JDB and SPC. That was all. Now, I was the team leader of the consultants. I hired a bunch of people. None of them were at SLBDC. I didn't know anything about tea or rubber per se, but I knew something about restructuring plantation organizations and all those things. So then we started the process of building a consensus. Now, how do you build a consensus among all the people? The first step to building a consensus, I know I'm giving a long answer, but without it, it doesn't mean anything. The first step to building a consensus is to get every room at the same time. If they're not willing to talk, then you can't even bring up the subject. Now, how do you do that? That is also Pfizer's technique. Okay, what you do is you make them an offer that they can't refuse. Okay, you set up a workshop in a 4-star hotel outside of Colombo, say starting from Friday evening till Sunday after breakfast. You invite all these people to come. They are not going to come. Then you invite their wives and children also. Okay, so the first workshop also, all these key people, secretaries to ministries, the chairman of the JDB and SPC, the key JDB, SPC directors, agriculture secretary, all these people, maybe 20 people with their families were all invited for a workshop. I mean, the families didn't have to participate in the workshop. So we had the first workshop and nothing much. The consultants had done about 3 months of work where we had done case studies of 10 estates, varying estates, nothing happened. So then 2 months later, the second workshop, same group of people were invited. And then what we were hoping happened, I still remember it was Lincoln Pereira, who was the chairman of the JEDB at the time, who suddenly in the middle of all the discussions, how to improve the JEDB SPC, how to bring private sector management practices, he said, how can you bring private sector management practices into the plantation? We had to follow every government regulation. He exaggerated and said, even if I want to buy a pencil, I had to get 3 quotations. How can I ever do it? The only way for private sector management is for private sector people to manage the plantations. Okay, he brought it up. We were waiting for that. So the whole discussion of this whole study to improve the JEDB SPC became a different story. Other people stepped in, and that was the point at which even the subject of management contracts was even broached. So we took that and ran with that ball. The consultants changed the entire thing, but how to do it. So we had number of thoughts, discussions. One of the first things was, how many things should you break it up into? Should the JEDB and the SPC be individual, just 2? Or should there be many small ones? At one end, if you had the JEDB and the SPC, they were just too large. As far as private sector in Sri Lanka was concerned, they were not had the capacity to do it. On the other end, you didn't want to divide these 500 estates into lots of little 3 estate groups, because if you did, that was absolutely a recipe for political interference. Every politician would have their catchers take over 3 estates. We would not have been able to control it. So we had to come up with an in-between size, big enough to only let the big boys play, but small enough so they could afford it. Okay. So the initial one was not 22 RPC. We said, take there were 13 regional boards in JDB and SPC, divide them into 11, keep out 2. That's a particular reason I'll explain. Take the rest, and we will then form companies with the others. So we put this to the Economic Affairs Committee of the Cabinet, who came back and said, no, 11 groups too small, you need more. So we said, okay, how much? It was a negotiation. We said, okay, we can't reduce it much, increase it much beyond about 20, 22, because the plantation company will be too small, at which point all kinds of people will step in and say, I can do it. That we decided 22. That the Cabinet subcommittee agreed. And that's how we went from there to the 22 companies. So it wasn't, this is the optimal size of plantation to get, for management or anything. This is what needed to be done to bring in private management. You understand? So we didn't have a clean slate on which we could draw the pictures. That was the first step. Then it had to be only management, right? So we gave 5-year management contracts, right? And there were lots of things that went in between. Many hurdles that came up even within this. For example, originally the government agreed that you should allow foreign companies also to bid on this. Okay. So, and local companies. So we pre-qualified. We asked for pre-qualification based on financial strength and experience. And we pre-qualified about 50 or 60 local companies and about 45 foreign companies. Some big boys also we pre-qualified. Then the government got cold feet and said, no, you can't have foreign companies. So it was my job to write to the foreign companies and say, yeah, sorry, here's the $200 you paid for pre-qualification papers. We are giving it back to you. We are really sorry. But I used the opportunity. I sent every one of these foreign companies a list of the pre-qualified Sri Lankan companies with the names and contact details. On the other side, I sent to every one of the Sri Lankan pre-qualified companies a list of the foreign pre-qualified companies and their contact details. So in reality, even though foreign companies were left out, there were some people who joined together and provided inputs. There were so many steps we had to do. So that was when we brought in private management. And that was the first step. Then it was another whole step. I don't think we have time to go, but to go from private management, how do you go to the whole privatization? That also, I say it in the simplest way and how it happened without going into the management contracts said, if there is a profit, the management companies each fielded about 3 or 4 people to key positions. Their salaries were paid. They were not given anything else, right? They managed it. All the accounts were done on behalf of the government company. Borrowing was done in the name of the government company because it was a 100% government-owned company, right? And mind you, it was not 53. There was a 99-year lease, okay, there at that time. And so you had that. I'm losing my, okay. Anyway, but if they got a profit, they got a share. If there was a loss, the loss was with the government, right? No private sector
Yeah.
would have come in because these were loss-making things.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the
Mm-hmm.
rule. 5 years later, when Sudaraka Ariyaratne became president, Premadasa had been assassinated. We, the very people who said this, now went and told a different story to the government, saying, I mean, this is crazy. Who signed a contract like this? If there's a profit, you get the private sector gets the share. If there's a loss, the government bears a loss. So we must have these companies bear a loss also, which was in another way arguing they must buy shares. So it is a very much a yes minister arrangement, okay? Where we had to start at point A and go to point B in a devious way. There were many, many steps in between. I don't have time to talk about it. I can talk for a day on it, the things we had to do. That's how these companies were formed. Okay?
Yeah.
And also I said one last thing, the 99 years before we when we went to the full privatization, again we got a message from the government. No. 99 years was too much. You make it 49 years. So how did it become 53? Because 4 years had already gone by at that time. I chose to imagine the 49 as 49 on top of the 4. That's not what the cabinet said. They didn't make it clear. So that's why we got 53, a funny number like 53.
Yes. You mentioned that there were 2 companies that were set aside. I assume you're referring to the JDP and the SPC. I wanted to know your views on whether you think their management should also be privatized. You also now have El Kadua falling back on the hands of state management as well.
Okay. Well, first of all, I should tell you why they were left aside. They were not left aside for any reason. It's just that we allocated all the employees from the regional boards and the estates all to these 22 companies we formed. But there were 2,000 people in the head office of the JDB SPC, and we could not, no private sector would have wanted to take that headache. So we created a fiction saying there was about 50, we call them non-viable estates, which remained with the JDB SPC, and these so-called 2,000 people, it's a joke, who couldn't even manage the whole lot, was going to improve these before. Because if we had tried to include them at the beginning, the process would have collapsed. Again, did what we could. To answer your question, you're asking me that in 2017, when Ranil Wickramasinghe Jayapalane government was there, Mr. Pascaling was also there, I was on a committee. We put together a whole paper. There was I was on a committee, there was a subcommittee which I chaired, which had Indrajit Kumarasamy and Saman Kalegam on it. And there was a paper we did to privatize the rest and a whole method, what to do with the employees, what to do with the areas, to take out the sensitive land. It went to cabinet and there is cabinet approval in 2017 to privatize the rest of them in a somewhat different way with all the details. I still have the papers. I don't have the cabinet paper, but I have the papers we wrote, which decided that. But what happened? You see, it was not like Premadasa and Pascalingam's day. When a decision was taken, it was taken and action was taken. And if people blocked it, action was taken against them. What happened here was these plantations at that time fell. I am prepared to give the names in Kabir Rashin's ministry. There is a cabinet decision taken. Nothing was done. Pascalingham himself, he didn't have the power he had under Premadasa. So nothing happened. Like many, many cabinet decisions have been taken under the Jayapalane government and other governments, and nothing happens. Not like in the days of Premadasa. So yes, I think we need to privatize the rest of them, and there are plans already written and approved. Okay, but it's not happening. 7 years ago.
Yes, because the topic of the extension of the existing leases also keeps coming up a lot. How do you think the government should approach this topic? And do you think there should just be a blanket extension, or do you think they should reconsider each and every lease based on the merits of the performance of each of the plantation companies?
You know, I don't know whether you are aware, but also under Jayapalane, before the Jayapalane government finished, there was a detailed evaluation done on the performance of the 22 plantation companies. I think I mentioned this to you before. You may have got a copy. Yes. I have a copy of the thing, right? I had to step back and say something else. It depends on, okay, what we did was we took all this land and gave it at a very low price to the private sector of Sri Lanka 30 years ago, okay? It was. But if you look at it from the financial point of view, it was a positive thing for the government because they would be paying 5 billion rupees a year subsidy even today if they were not. Instead of which they are collecting maybe 2 billion and all that. That from that point of view. But from a different point of view, I am truly disappointed by the performance of all the plantation companies, even the ones that are profitable, because none of them, they got this cheap land, okay, absolutely cheap. We structure the finances to make it affordable. Otherwise, most of the companies couldn't even afford it. I don't want go into how we structure the finances with a lease rent which escalated and so on. With all that, what have they done, right? Okay, some people have made profits by putting oil palm, which is protected, and various things like that. But not a single company, right, has tried any thing radical or anything like that, right? So, okay, I'm, how shall I put it? Of course, there's about 20 years more to go in the leases. I think it's very important the government should stick to the leases. The government should not, I have heard many discussions, oh, you haven't performed, I'm going to take it away. No, there are legal contracts, okay? They must adhere to the legal contract. But there, I feel that it shouldn't be automatic at all that any of these companies, right, should get an extension. If they want to get an extension, they better pay some serious money, okay? That's my view. I know many of the people who are running the plantation, some work with me. They will scream and shout that I say this, right? But what have they done for 25? Why do we now they are trying to diversify a little, grow cinnamon or coffee in large extents. There is no purpose putting 100 acres of something. Then you have got 10,000 hectares, right? So I don't know. I think tea, I'm not an expert on tea, so I know there'll be a dozen people in your workshop or whatever who know about tea who will object to what I might say. But it seems to me there is no labor to pluck tea in this country and can only get worse. Okay. Right? So people have to start looking and specialize. Maybe some parts may grow tea, put it into other things. But I am not in a 20 years, you should just let it go, okay, for the next 10, 15. But when you get to 5 years before the end, I think it's time to say, okay, now we are not just going to extend the lease. You have got this cheap. You have only done so much. You pay some serious bucks to get this, okay? Or let somebody else come, honestly. Right? This is not at all what the people are saying out there, but that's my view.
Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation, and we really enjoyed hearing your insight. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. You're welcome. All right, Sudhakar.